All right, good afternoon, Marlins fans. Welcome to another episode of the Marlins Prospects Pod. My name is David Fernandez. With me, as always, is Joe Frisaro from manon2nd.com. We are here today to discuss the Marlins' approach at the MLB draft and what that approach might very well mean for some of the other prospects that are currently in the system and what it might mean for the big club down the line, stuff like that. But as we're sort of getting things rolling here today, we've got a little bit of breaking news. Joe, if you want to jump in on that one, tell me what you got on the Marlins first round pick, Jacob Berry.
Yeah. Thanks, David. And it's exciting time for the Marlins there. Jacob Berry is finalizing his deal. He's going to sign for $6 million. That's right about the slot figure. Probably just a pinch below it, whatever that final number was, but $6 million even. That's being wrapped up, and that deal's getting done. And Jacob Berry is going to be in the system before you know it. And switch hitting first baseman, third baseman, DH, whatever, from LSU. And exciting to get him done. They wasted no time. We already saw Drew Jones, number 2 pick overall with Arizona. He came to terms over $8 million, and good to get these guys in. Obviously, with the draft being a little later, David, get these kids signed, get them in, figure out where they're going to go, and put them in the system, and let's get to work. And we've talked about Jacob, a special hitter. Is our report. I'm hearing more a special person, kind of that kind of leader, and will embrace being a middle of the order bat. And we're anticipating a guy that's going to move fast through the system.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at how the board broke for the Marlins, and we talked about this on our show on Monday, they had their pick of all of the college bats, and we had identified that they wanted to go with the college bat with that first round pick. And when Kumar Rocker went third, that kind of threw a wrench in what was going on with some of the projections, which meant the Marlins were able to choose the guy that they wanted, and they ended up taking Jacob Berry out of LSU. Again, he was the number 6 overall selection. He was a 2021 first-team All-American this year with LSU. He hit .370 with a .630 slugging percentage, 15 homers, 48 RBIs. He walked more than he struck out last season, which is notable considering how often batters strike out nowadays, right? But it's also notable for the Marlins because we've seen some of the hitters coming through the system have issues with strikeouts. So hopefully that's not an issue for Berry if he sort of continues with that trend. 21 years old, measures out at 6 feet. He's a switch hitter, third base outfielder, DH. DJ Svilik said the other day that he has extreme plate discipline, great bat to ball skills. This is a player that could get to the Marlins in relatively short order. Obviously not this year, and probably not next year. I mean, maybe long shot the end of 2023. In all likelihood, we're probably looking at something like 2024, depending on that defensive development. But it's still an exciting addition to the Marlins system. What do you think about his ultimate sort of position in the pros, Joe?
Yeah, he's a worker, and DJ Svilik noted he wants to play third base. The organization is going to give him that opportunity. But as we know, and we've seen it before, guys go out there and they either prove they can handle that position or they move across the diamond and play first base. So I'm not so worried about that. Again, why I mentioned it the other day, it's not up to me or anybody individually to tell a player what he can or can't do. It's up to the player to show that he can do it. And because, he will be afforded and given that opportunity to show whether he can handle the hot corner, which is a little bit different at the pro level, especially the big league level. I know they're using aluminum bats and such, or metal bats in college, but it's a little bit different when everybody's hitting the ball 110 miles an hour, like it seems in the big leagues. But again, I think I noted this the other day. To me, the only position I care about Jacob Berry is he good enough to hit third in the order?
Right.
That's the position. The batting order position I pay attention much more to than the actual on the field position. And excited about this player. There are a lot of people rave about him. Multiple people speak to the character of the player and the person. And we kind of hinted on this the other day. I think we're set up, David. we're looking at a Sandy Alcantara, Yuri Perez at the top of the rotation. That's kind of when it's going to happen. Whether it's 23 or 24, we're talking about seriously contending, not being a fringe wild card team.
Right.
And Jacob Berry, by all accounts, can be part of a core that would include those guys, those two fronting the rotation. So that we keep in mind. But as we kind of move over to the rest of the draft, obviously we talked a little bit about day 2 the other day, where they went just all pitching, and then mostly college pitching. And just your thoughts on that philosophy, because I have some opinions on how I think that could impact and what it might impact as we get closer to the trade deadline on August 2nd this year, but also down the line, because obviously the Marlins are a pitching first organization, obviously like a little bit more balanced, but I'm a big believer. I'd take all arms if the arms are always better than the bats, and you can always trade it, and you always need it because of attrition, underperformance, injury, and so forth. But I have some thoughts, especially on the second rounder and third rounders, and how that might impact a very highly considered draft pick from a few years ago. But just kind of your thoughts on going the pitching route.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you said, they went with, a position player with their first selection, but then their next 11 selections were all pitchers. And the majority of those pitchers, as you noted, were college pitchers. So guys that will sort of debut in the pros, not at the lowest levels of the system, ideally, and kind of move through the system relatively quickly, right? Because they're a little bit more physically mature. They've done this for a little bit longer, things like that. It kind of tells me that, the Marlins know that they can evaluate and develop pitching. So they are sort of playing to their strengths. We also heard DJ Svilik talk about how they were sort of just playing the board. That's kind of how the draft board broke for them for many of those selections. It's not that they wanted to go with 11 pitchers in a row. They had identified some position talent in there as well, but ultimately those position players were taken before the Marlins were comfortable drafting them, and they ultimately pivoted to these pitchers instead. It kind of fills out the depth in the system, and it gives the Marlins flexibility to make trades down the line, trades that can help the big club, fight for that wild card position this season, or trades that will ultimately help the big club 2 or 3 years down the line. As you said, we're looking at a contention window with Sandy and Yuri at the top of the pitching rotation. Well, maybe one of these guys either drafted this year or drafted last year, maybe one of those guys might be part of a deal to bring in a higher level bat to the system. Because again, we know that they can develop the pitching. There are questions about how the organization develops hitting. So it'll be interesting to track not only Jacob Berry's development, but how do these pitchers affect the way that the Marlins approach their roster manipulation throughout this entire, over the course of the next couple seasons, right? Because these guys might very well help them down the line. Now, you mentioned some of these names. I'm going to kind of highlight some of them right now. We'll start with their other day 2 pick. They chose another guy named Jacob on day 2, number 46 overall at our Liberty Union High School in Ohio. He was the Gatorade Player of the Year in Ohio, 0.35 ERA, 94 strikeouts in 40 innings pitched, only 6 walks in that season. I don't know if you had a chance to see the draft, but he actually brought his friend who was his catcher there. They had a nice moment, and he had a very sort of engaging interview on MLB Network. It was a lot of fun to see, sort of our first glimpse at who Jacob Miller is as a person. Really, really exciting. 18 years old, 6'2". MLB Pipeline had him as the number 37 prospect overall. Marlins got him at number 46. He's got a pretty hard fastball at 18 years old. 91 to 95 is the average. It touches 97. He also has a curveball and a slider, and he's developing his changeup. He's a guy that, he might very well step into the system, obviously at the lower levels, but maybe he's somebody that takes over, from a prospect development perspective for one of the other arms that we've seen kind of move up, right? And we've seen a lot of guys kind of move through the system relatively quickly. So, it'll be interesting to see how Jacob Miller sort of fits into that mix. What do you have on Miller or some of these pitchers?
Yeah. I was literally scribbling and putting kind of a next to his name on my little notepad, Jacob Miller, because I think in many ways he's going to be the key to this draft in terms of the pitching and what it can enable them to do. Now, this doesn't mean that somebody else below him can't emerge into a middle of the rotation or be a surprise type of pitcher. But
Right.
He's a high school kid. Keep in mind, much like a pitcher drafted in 2020, left-hander Dax Fulton, who is up at high A Beloit. And I'm wondering, and I'm just thinking and throwing it out there, if someone like Miller can come into the system, show enough that it looks real, that now all of a sudden you're like, am I ready now to entertain offers for Dax Fulton to improve the offense, maybe attach him? If you want to get real ambitious and move, let's say, and make Pablo or Trevor Rogers available and attach Dax Fulton, or independently move Fulton, what could a trade look like? So I find it really fascinating, and I'm keeping an eye and see if the organization is food for thought. Not to say I'm eager to get rid of Dax Fulton,
right.
but it does put you in a spot where I think if you see promise and you got the pipeline coming, now you could say, Joe, will you be trading a left-handed pitcher? Another part is I'm banking on Jake Eder returning next year at full strength and resuming, because I know the organization loves him. They're still high on him. I would not trade Jake Eder. And, I think that would be, you do that and this guy's winning Cy Young somewhere, you're going to be really, really mad at yourself. So you're going to have, you got Luzardo, and then you got Eder that, you could get lefty pitching along the way, but that could be very interesting. And just kind of your thoughts, if you would be that ambitious to say, hey, look, we got to do something bold to bring in, a legit outfield or middle infield prospect. And I'm willing now to listen on Dax Fulton.
Yeah, it'll be, again, as you said, it'll be interesting to see how they sort of sort all of that out. And I'm with you. I wouldn't trade Jake Eder right now, coming off of Tommy John surgery last August. He's sort of working his way back. He should be ready to go full tilt in spring training for 2023. He's further along than a guy like Dax Fulton. He's at the AA level, or was at the AA level at the time of the injury, 23 years old, an exciting prospect, could end up being one of the better pitchers in the system. He's in that same draft class as Max Meyer. So it'll be fun to watch him and how they decide to move forward. But you're right. A guy like Miller, or even the guy that they chose in the third round, Carson Millbrandt out of Liberty High School in Missouri. These are guys that might very well take the place of somebody like Dax Fulton and allow the Marlins to deal from that depth. And it'll be interesting to see how they approach that. Millbrandt was the Missouri Gatorade Player of the Year after going 7-1 with a 1.66 ERA and 91 strikeouts as a senior. He's also 6'2", 18 years old. His fastball hits 96 miles per hour. He's got a pretty high spin rate. He also has a couple breaking balls, a curve, and a slider. Also developing a change. These guys, Millbrandt and Miller, probably start at the rookie level, at the Florida complex level, in there if they get signed. Hopefully they get signed. But you're right. Those two prospects are probably the key to the sort of long-term success of this draft class. Do you have any idea what the Marlins might do with some of these guys, Joe?
Yeah, no, not yet, because it's still so early and they're in that process of promoting guys. But that's safe to say. I mean, especially younger players, and even Barry, I didn't even get a complete read on where he would start off. I think I noted the other day I could see him maybe spending a few days in Jupiter, playing maybe some scrimmages, live games. Apparently he's ready to go. Like he's up to speed. It's not like he was shut down for a long period of time and there could be some lag there. But I think with with Berry, I'd probably try to get him to Beloit as soon as possible. And then if he can handle that, perhaps he gets a week or so in Pensacola to end this year. But the younger kids, the high school kids, and there are only a couple of them here, they'd go to the complex level. High school season's been over a little long. I believe that their season ended a little bit earlier than the college is. And usually the college arms, they play way more games anyway in college. The high school kids were in the showcase time for them. And a lot of those those college guys, some project more as bullpen arms. Some will. They, generally speaking, you become a reliever at the big league level because you're a failed starter. It's kind of the rule of thumb there, and usually a track record. But I also think we're getting a little more sophisticated of guys that you can almost pinpoint an 8th, 9th rounder that may have real big velo and not really 3 pitches, maybe a 2-pitch guy that kind of fits more of that reliever profile where you can just kind of throw them in the pen early. Those college guys could fill in now at high A Beloit and then be push those Beloit kids up to Pensacola, the Pensacola kids up to Jacksonville for the players that are eventually making their way to Miami, to join the Marlins, the guys off of the Jumbo Shrimp roster.
Yeah, and we've talked in previous episodes how there are a handful of pitchers both at Jacksonville and in Pensacola that seem to be ready to contribute at the very least to the Marlins bullpen. So it'll be interesting to see how the organization ultimately sort of spreads these guys out through the system and what it means for moving up and down. Well, we'll talk a little bit later about one of the promotions that's happened in the meantime that kind of will affect this discussion as well. But as you noted, those two guys that we just talked about, Miller and Millbrandt, both high school guys, the Marlins chose another high school pitcher later in the draft, the 17th rounder, Evan Crest. But all of the other pitchers that they selected were college pitchers, right? And most of those came during day 2 of the draft. We've already talked about Millbrandt. They chose in the 4th round Marcus Johnson out of Duke. In the 5th round, they chose Josh White out of Cal. That's the player that's pictured there. 6th round, Jared Poland out of Louisville. 7th round, Kyle Krieger out of Louisiana Tech. 8th round, Dale Stanovich out of Rutgers. 9th round, Evan Taylor out of Arkansas. And then in the 10th round, which was their last pick on day 2, they chose Cade Gibson, also out of Louisiana Tech. Again, all of these are college arms. There's a mix of starters and relievers in there. And, there's some really sort of high talent guys. One thing that I want to note, the 9th round pick, Evan Taylor, his hometown is Florence, Alabama. And the Marlins already have a guy from Florence, Alabama on the team. That's Braxton Garrett. So hopefully he has a similar sort of career path as Garrett. Was there anybody beyond who we've talked about here in day 2? Were any of those guys, did they jump out at you at all, Joe?
Well, at first I have to go to full disclosure, and you don't even know this, but I once worked in Florence, Alabama at the Times Daily. My wife and I, we weren't married then, but we were both working at that newspaper many, many moons ago. So I'm all for the Florence, Alabama. For the people who don't know, that's the northwest part of the state. And back in those fun days at the newspaper, I would, on a Friday night for like football, if I wasn't at the game and I was desking, there was over 100 high schools that we'd take phone calls on from parts of Mississippi, Tennessee, and Alabama. We have football games coming in all night. Those are high school basketball is even worse because more basketball teams than the girls' basketball teams doubled all that. So those were fun days. They were busy days, but so we're pulling for the Florence, Alabama guys. But I find it fascinating always when you get the Louisiana Tech guys. Yeah. The 7th rounder Krieger and Gibson at 10th. It reminds me a little bit of when they did a few years ago at Wright State and got Burdick and JD Orr. It's like obviously the scout did a really good job there because he's there watching somebody.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, he finds somebody else. So if you want to so I'm always intrigued by that. I have my Wright State shirt. I wore it the other day for Burdick. I'm gonna have to get a Louisiana Tech shirt to wear in honor of the two guys and a hat tip to the scouts who's over there getting them to get 2 of his guys. And so I'm keeping my eye on those two. But as you noted with the college arms, I think a few of them I can't tell you the names offhand, but DJ noted a couple of 97s in there. So, from some of those guys from,
one of them
sports.
was this guy, Marcus Johnson out of Duke. He spent time as a reliever for Duke as a sophomore. They transitioned him to the starting rotation. Didn't have as much success as a starter, but Svilik mentioned he touches 97. He also has a slider and a changeup, so it'll be interesting to watch his development for sure.
Yeah, I'm putting him in a pen right now. I'm not messing around. I'm not going to do a Max Meyer thing with him. You're throwing 97 right now. You're in the pen for me. And if you have more success, is he a big kid? What did they list how tall he is?
Hold on, I'll tell you right now.
Yeah, because like I said, I want to see those.
Yeah,
those
he's
guys.
big, 6'6", 200 pounds.
There you go. You don't have to worry about repeating delivery. Just go throw it as hard as you can, and then get that ball right up on the hitter and get 3 outs, and we all go home. So I'm transitioning him. The Marlins are listening. That's your closer of the future. What's his name? We already are anointing.
Marcus Johnson.
Marcus Johnson, closer of the future. You heard it first here on this podcast.
I mean, he's a high strikeout guy. He, 59 strikeouts in 56 innings as a sophomore, 76 strikeouts in 69 innings as a junior. So,
in the ACC, it's a tough conference. So, yeah.
You mentioned Krieger earlier, one of the Louisiana Tech guys. He's actually a fifth-year senior, and he's somebody that had 16 saves in over at Louisiana Tech. So he's also potentially a bullpen guy, and he's older, so he might actually move through the system a lot faster than some of these other guys. So that'll be interesting to watch for sure.
David, one thing I want to mention too, and we get caught up obviously only usually in a draft. Even 40 rounds, you're lucky you get 5 guys that are making it to the big leagues.
Yeah.
And so it's not like everyone makes it to the big leagues, but that doesn't mean it's a bad draft. So if a guy's like what we're mentioning, some of these guys here, and we hope everyone has a chance to pitch in the big leagues or play in the big leagues if you're drafted and let your pro dreams come true. But it's really important that if they make your minor league system better, then they make the other prospects you have better, because the more talent you have around you, if you're in there and you're saving games and you're reliable at AA or whatever, even if you're not going to be a big star in the big leagues, you're helping the development of the good ones. So it's really, really important not to undervalue their value, because sometimes those guys will make somebody in the order better, someone in the rotation better, because they're reliable, they're able to get out of a jam or log innings that it's not overworking somebody else. So you're basically filling your rosters with these players. They'll all be given that opportunity. They don't all make it, but so it's not a win or a loss in a draft isn't always based on who makes it to the big leagues and then performs in the big leagues.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in the past. Some of these guys, and I'm gonna show the day 3 names here in a second. Some of these guys, at the tail end that we might dismiss, they may end up becoming one of the better prospects from the draft. I mean, we've talked about Josh Simpson a couple different times this year, and he's at the AA level right now, pitching amazingly well out of the Pensacola bullpen, and he was a 32nd round draft pick for the Marlins a couple seasons ago. So, they can find talented guys here later in the draft. In day 3, this was sort of characterized almost as a different draft by DJ Svilik afterwards, because, the approach obviously is very, very different in day 3 of the draft. So you look at some of the names here, and let me get this out of the way so you could see the graphic completely. They started to mix in position players here on day 3. A couple notable names that jump out. The first position player that they took after that run of pitchers was an outfielder out of Long Beach State, Chase Luttrell. He's somebody that over 4 seasons, he had a slash line of 294, 346, and 464. As a senior, he hit 312 with 9 homers, 46 RBI. He's a left-handed hitter. He's a guy that can play all 3 outfield spots as well as first base. we've talked in the past how the Marlins seem to like guys with positional versatility, and Trace Luttrell looks like somebody like that. Another notable name here, and we'll talk about him more in a bit, Missouri first baseman Torrin Montgomery, 14th round draft pick for the Marlins, number 412 overall. This is actually the second time that the Marlins have drafted Mr. Montgomery. They drafted him in the 35th round in the 2019 draft out of Lake Washington High School in Kirkland, Washington. He didn't sign with the Marlins that year. Instead, he went to college, started first at Boise State, then transferred over to Missouri. He's somebody that had a breakout year as a junior with Missouri, hit 362, 11 doubles, 7 homers, 47 RBI. And so, some interesting names in here. We saw some connections to the state of Florida here on day 3 as well. In the 16th round, the Marlins took Florida State second baseman Brett Roberts. In the 17th round, they took a high school pitcher, Evan Crest, out of Tampa Wharton High School. And then in the 19th round, they drafted University of South Florida catcher. Well, they called him a catcher, but he mostly played third base, Carmine Lane. So there were some state of Florida connections here on day 3 of the draft. Was there anybody from this last group, Joe, that caught your eye at all?
Yeah, you're talking about Montgomery because he was a 2-time draft pick, and it's funny because what did you say? He was like a 32nd pick, 19.
35th round.
35th. Pick. Okay, so now he jumps up to 14th. He stays in school 3 more years. He might be a first rounder. So I got my Jordan Montgomery. No, in all seriousness, first baseman, good hitter apparently. And I do like the tenacity. I kind of like the Marlins doubling back, Yeah. And they drafted Griffin Conine and then traded for him. After Little Niner didn't sign with them. And so that's an interesting one that they clearly have history on this player and like him. And we're pulling for those guys. But interesting, too. Obviously, just 20 rounds. And as you noted, about players in the 32nd or whatever, those rounds are not there anymore. So the work of the amateur side continues as they still go out and look at these players who didn't make it. We'll see what's next for those players that would have been in those next 20 rounds. But obviously it magnifies the importance of being drafted. But, we're getting to that point, the All-Star game's now come and gone, which I thought was a good game. I didn't expect the National League to shut it down offensively after the first inning, but
Stanton got out there on the mound, of course.
Yeah, and that was it. But Sandy pitched well, they lose.
Oh man, he was so good. He was so good. But listen, Joe, my favorite part of the night was Nestor Cortez talking about Hialeah. Because I'm from Hialeah. I was born in Hialeah Hospital before it was turned into Palmetto General. So he is speaking directly to me. I loved it. It was my favorite part.
He's sitting around going, now he played with Cooper in AAA. Oh, Coop's up. Yeah, that was when he's like in his windup. Coop and I are in AAA. Yeah. Strike one. It's like for all those that got overly amped up and worked up about Sandy. I mean, they're miking the pitchers and catchers during the at-bats. How seriously we're taking it so seriously, and they're just having fun. They're just hugging each other.
No, it was great. MLB did a great job of showcasing the game and having I wish they could do more stuff like that to really sort of push their players forward like that. And who knows? I mean, the draft, like the next crop of stars. I mean, I know it's cliche, but this next crop of stars has just kind of come into the systems. So
it'd be kind of hard doing it in Game 7, but it's like, but I hear you. But we're getting to, and we wanted to touch on this a little bit because this is why I think the Marlins go with the trade deadline coming up. And I don't think the Marlins, I think, are going to be cautious buyers. I don't think they're going to be overly aggressive. That's kind of what I'm hearing. And it's like, they'll do something, but it probably is not going to be a big splash. But just for us to play GM, and if you were to dangle a Dax Fulton or Trevor Rogers or even Pablo, let's say you go to the Yankees, who lose Luis Severino, could Pablo Lopez net you an Anthony Volpe and a potential and more? Estevan Florial, who's 24 years old, lefty, been in the big leagues a little bit, could kind of be, you could bring him in there. He could kind of be like your left-handed hitting version of Brian De La Cruz from a year ago when he got him from Houston. But those are two guys that if you wanted to be fun and make a trade, those are two prospects I would try to kind of target. Obviously, Volpe is, you hear Yankee fans will say you're crazy, but we're not dealing with the hysteria of fans. We're dealing with what we think could be a good baseball trade. Do you think that they could go that route or even should be thinking of that?
Listen, I think you sort of characterized it perfectly. Cautious buyers, because they are on the fringes of, the wild card race. They're 5.5 games back, which means if they have a run in them, they could very well sort of push for one of those spots. But the reality is they haven't performed well against those teams that are above them in the standings. The offense has been so inconsistent this season. And I know that they're getting guys back now from injury. Jazz will be back. Some of the pitchers, Luzardo should be back soon. The bullpen will have some reinforcements soon. But I think cautious buyer is probably the way to go, because they do have so many high-end prospects of their own that probably need a shot or a look at some point, that you might want to create some space for them. So do you pivot away from, as you said, a guy like Pablo Lopez, who should get you a nice return? Trevor Rogers, all-star last year, obviously has struggled this year. You worry maybe that you're selling low on him, but still, he's probably going to bring you back a prospect of significance. Even trading a guy like Garrett Cooper, whose value is maybe as high as it's ever been coming off of his all-star run. Those guys will help the system and help the Marlins, in present terms. And then obviously in the future, if they sort of pivot to sort of one of those moves. But if they can bring in young talent that can help them right now, I think that's probably the way to go. Young, controllable talent that will help them not only in 2022, but obviously in 2023 and beyond, because you don't want to send out a guy like Dax Fulton for a rental to try and get back in the wild card race now. So something like that wouldn't make any sense. But it'll be interesting to see what they ultimately decide to do. We're more than a week out from the trade deadline. The trade deadline this year is August 2nd, I believe. Yep. So we'll have another episode before we get to that point. So we can dive a little bit deeper into trades next week. But one thing that we might see here as July kind of moves on and as we move into August, some movement in the system itself. None of the big names have kind of moved up, but one player that did that's expected to get the promotion, soon as play picks back up, is Will Banfield. He was a catcher that's been with the Marlins since 2018. He was a competitive balance round B pick in 2018. He was the number 69 selection overall. He has spent the 2022 season with high A Beloit, only hitting .204 with a .588 OPS, does have 8 homers, 36 RBI, 22 years old, primarily a catcher, has, played a little DH. He's somebody that the Marlins actually had on their in their player pool in 2020, even though he didn't make an appearance for the team. He was in the 2020 player pool during that COVID shortened season because they wanted him to catch bullpen sessions and play in simulated and intra-squad games. So he's been around for a little while. The Marlins have other catching prospects that seem to have moved past him in the pecking order. Guys like Paul McIntosh, who we've talked about. They drafted Joe Mack last year. We've obviously seen the emergence of Nick Fortes, but this is, that's a move that might be signaling something else is happening down the line, because you move up Banfield. Does that mean McIntosh gets moved up to Jacksonville? And then does that mean something else is happening with the catchers in the organization? It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. What do you have on any of the prospects?
Yeah. It's just Banfield's he's someone I root for. I like Will. I like the pick at the time. He was a Vanderbilt commit. And amazingly talented defensive catcher.
Yep.
You noted slash DH, and really he's only DHing to get at bats,
right.
to make sure to try to get his bat up to speed. It hasn't happened for him on the offensive side, and that's discouraging. But man, this guy's an elite defensive player and handling of pitching. And man, if there's like a catching specialist, it's Will Banfield. Maybe they feel getting down in Florida and see what they can do. Get him up to Double-A, because as you know, he's getting a little bit older now. Maybe he's a trade possibility too. Yep. Get him a little bit of looks there. He's included in a deal. Somebody may need catching depth, and that glove is that good. The arm. I mean, that guy can shut down a running game. That guy can run a pitching staff. Pitchers can throw stuff in the dirt. He blocks everything. He's amazingly quick, and pitchers love throwing to him. But I wonder if they're kind of angling him to showcase him, to maybe get him. He might need a change of scenery. Yeah. So that's just kind of my immediate thoughts. But he's a player I've always been very high on. Obviously, you got to hit some level at the big leagues. You could deal with a little bit of a backup catcher not hitting, but you got to have some sort of proficiency. But what's strange with me about Will, David, is he does have some power in that bat. Yeah. So it's like so it's almost like maybe just sell out a little bit for more power, look for an area of the plate and try to drive the ball rather than overthink it to be an everyday big league catcher. But you gotta be able to justify your spot on the roster, and to do so, he's going to have to do something at least offensively to justify that. But overall, it will be interesting to see. He goes up to Double-A. Obviously, McIntosh, we've talked about him before, get him to Triple-A. But it makes you wonder too if Banfield could be included in potentially something that they're thinking of doing, because I'm sure at some point he's going to have to come up in a Rule 5 situation as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Marlins have their hands full with Rule 5 considerations coming up, because so many of their prospects at the Double-A and Triple-A level, guys that we've talked about ad nauseum, JJ Bleday, Griffin Conine, so many of those pitchers, those guys are all going to be Rule 5 eligible come December. So it'll be interesting to see how they deal with that. Banfield, as you noted, great defensive catcher. Baseball America had him as the best defensive catcher in the organization in 2021. So, he's somebody obviously that you root for. Just wrapping up here today, Joe, we did get a question via Twitter from one of our followers. His Twitter handle is Adam_Valiente. He goes by Benito Carr. So a little reference to the original Marlins club. He asks, do you think the Marlins go after Michael Conforto, now that they do not need to send back a draft pick? What do you think about that situation, Joe?
Yeah, boy, if it was before they signed Soler, I would have said yes, because in spring training, his name, I know he had the injury and he ended up, not doing anything, but the Marlins had serious interest in him. And keep this in mind, Scott Boras' client, the Marlins were talking with, about Nick Castellanos. So they were, in concert with Boras and those talks, they were, negotiating a bit with on Castellanos and Conforto. But the fact that they have, Soler and Garcia locked up to multi-year deals, and as you noted, you got Bleday. You're going to have to make some decisions on your outfield, Sanchez. And you still don't have a true center fielder. I know Conforto could play there a little bit. I'd probably say no. If that was a spring training, or if they didn't lock up both corner outfielders, I would say no. But as of now, I can't see it. And that's not even throwing the money consideration in it. And then you could kind of look and say, if you were to allocate, he was $100 million from what I understood. So if you say at $60 million, is that the best place to allocate the $60 million? Do you want to put it somewhere else in your roster? And I'm probably more inclined to do that than sign Michael Conforto.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would jam up the roster even more, I think, at this point. they signed.
And coming off what, surgery too?
Yeah,
So you don't know. I know he's still young, and a healthy Conforto is very intriguing because he's an impactful left-handed bat who's a versatile outfielder who can play some center, play corner. You probably don't want him in center all the time, but he can play there for you when you needed him to.
Yeah.
But I just don't. I think that has passed when they signed Soler.
Yeah, Soler and then Garcia. I mean, and again,
he was already in the fold. That's why I only mentioned Soler.
Right.
They already had Garcia signed at that point.
Adding a guy like Conforto would only add another block for some of the prospects at the AAA level, guys like Blade and Burdick and even Gerard, like all those guys, So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. We will be back with you next week to talk about how everything is shaping up for the second half of the season for not only the Marlins, but some of their most important prospects. We'll be nearing the trade deadline at that point. So, we'll get into some trade discussions next week. Do they deal some of these prospects or do they deal 4 prospects? It'll be interesting to see how they end up kind of going in that regard. Obviously, a week from now, we'll have a clearer picture of where the Marlins will stand in terms of being a buyer or a seller, after having played a full week's worth of games. So it'll be interesting to see, how it all sort of plays out. Of course, if you see the scroll down there at the bottom, dugoutmugs.com/man-on-2nd, you can get your hands on one of these spectacular little drinking vessels and have the cold beverage or hot beverage of your choice as you watch the Marlins get going tomorrow. They've got an afternoon game against the Texas Rangers. So that'll be fun to watch Marlins baseball once again. And if you enjoyed the show, obviously subscribe to the 5 Reasons Sports Network YouTube channel. You get Marlins content, but also content for all of the other South Florida sports, Miami Heat, Miami Dolphins, all of the other teams. And, beyond that too, F1, we've got all sorts of stuff here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. You definitely want to check it out. If there's anybody that you would like us to discuss in the future, you could drop a comment below or you could tag us on social media and we will get to those prospects as you wonder about them, and we will give our input, our insight, and our opinions. For Joe Frisaro, actually I'll go this way. For Joe Frisaro, Man on 2ND, my name is David Fernandez. Thanks for watching, everybody.